Hi friends, good evening to one and all. Happy Teachers Day. It is one of those days where we think of our teachers. I am thankful to my teachers like all of us are, who have made what we are, who without any swarth, means without any selfish motive, wanted their students, wards to come up in life. And for me, teachers don't necessarily mean that who are taught you in the schools and colleges. Teachers are those, they may not know you, but they are your inspiration. And what could be a better day than today, the 5th September, where India celebrates birthday of Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan as a Teachers' Day. Friends, Ray Consulting has started the series Ray Talks. And thanks to your love and support, as you all know, it's a global sensation with registrations from almost 33 countries. Huge registrations, good support from attendees' participation. What we thought as Guru Dakshina for the industry leaders, let's start a series called Agri Legends. And today, a legend, Mr. Ram Kaundinya, is here to start this series, inaugurate this series today on an auspicious day, Teachers' Day. So, I never knew Ram Kaundinya until a couple of years ago. When I say I never knew, I never met him in person. But all my career, when I started, when I continued, we used to hear about him. We used to talk about him. Probably, there is no board meeting, there's no meeting in India where his reference is not taken as a benchmark for various aspects. He's just not joined to the industry. He is torchbearer for many of the initiatives in the country. So many aspects. So I'm honored to have Mr. Ram Kaundinya with me, who had been to me for the last couple of years since I've started interacting with him in physical form as a friend, philosopher, and guide to me. Without any hesitation, when I text him, when I speak to him, he's always available for me to guide. He has been a great support for us when we initiated a thought on Digital Ag India conference to be held in India. It was a very, very difficult task for me to get into that. Then we had set up advisors where Mr. Ram Kaundinya, I had Shiv Kumar ITC, another legend, to help me out to make this happen. Multiple verticals, different parts of the world, different streams of companies or industries coming in. And more than anything, it was Mr. Ram Kaundinya who suggested, okay, Raj, just don't have a conference. It's an amazing idea. You have so many panelists coming and talking to you. But let us make a suggestion report, a documented report, so that the governments, the industry can benefit out of this deliberations. And he painstakingly took the notes and he guided us to prepare the note. And it was very, very much appreciated with the government of Telangana state. Mr. Jayesh Ranjan, Principal Secretary, IT, took personal interest in understanding this report, and I'm sure it must be helping them to work on various aspects. So, sir, I welcome you to this Ray Talks and being my first Agri Legend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes. Who doesn't know? Yes. Who doesn't know Mr. Ram Kaundinya? I mean, Kaundinya, maybe Ram, very few people would know him. Maybe his contemporaries would know him by his first name. But for most of us, it is Kaundinya. Let me take through his brief profile, though everybody knows, maybe there are new generations, new people who would love to know about him. Though I will be talking to him about his journey, but it's my privilege to introduce him to this August gathering here in the form of attendees. Sir, you're welcome to this gathering. Incidentally, we are meeting in a virtual meeting, so I'm extremely sorry. Today being a Teacher's Day, I would have honored you with a beautiful bouquet and a shawl. So that is due from me. So whenever I see you next, I'll get you in person. Yeah. So, Mr. Ram Kaundinya, you know, he's worked for the agri industry for more than 35 years. He's an expert in the field of management, especially in the business of agriculture. He is an author, strategic management consultant, teacher, and a policy analyst in India. Mr. Ram Kaundinya worked in agrochemical industry with Hext India and the managing director of Sinomate Agro. He had also been a part of seed industry for the last couple of decades. He has held positions of managing director of Emergent Genetics and as the global CEO of Advanta Seeds. Mr. Kaundinya introduced something for the agro industry, not industry, a business model, mergers and acquisitions that he developed, having led the companies in multiple transactions across the world. Mr. Kaundinya was the chairman of CropLife India, chairman of the agricultural group of the Biotech Industry Association. Currently is the Director General of Federation of Seed Industry of India, that is FSII. Mr. Kaundinya consults on VC, PE funds and advises to the corporates in areas of strategic planning and M&A. Mr. Kaundinya served as an independent director on the boards of Axis Bank. He is on the boards of Axis Finance, Syngenta India, Bruhad Energy Solutions and Technologies, AgriLand Industries, and Vasudhaica Software Solutions, amongst the few from the many. He serves on the expert review committee of Access to Seeds Foundation, the Netherlands. He serves on the MACE Independent Steering Committee of the CGIAR Institution, CIMIT, Mexico. Mr. Kaundinya served as a member of a committee set up by the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Prime Minister of India to suggest agricultural policies and action plans for a secure and sustainable agriculture under the chairmanship of Dr. Raj Baroda. The report is submitted in August 2019. Mr. Kaundinya co-founded Think Ag. Mr. Kaundinya, most of you must be aware, he regularly writes in various newspapers on Indian agriculture. He also partners with a global philanthropic organization, Social Venture Partners. So with so many hats one person wearing, I don't know how he manages time, even at this junction. Sir, you're welcome, and I'll start the chat a minute after I speak about our company for a second.
Sure.
Ray Consulting. As you're all aware, Ray Consulting is formed about a decade ago after a long stint in the agriculture industry I spent. I worked with companies like Rallis, Keminova, PI Industries, and Nagarjuna Fertilizers. Ray Consulting brings substantial experience to the diversified agricultural sector by advising leading players across in India and Southeast Asia on a range of strategic, commercial, and operational issues. We work in all the segments in agri-value chain. I have clients in India, I have clients in Southeast Asia whom we are serving. Ray Consulting's deep agribusiness sector expertise and growth strategy development capabilities enable us to deliver uniquely rich insights that lead to meaningful impact to our clients on growth strategy, M&A, go-to-market commercial strategy for the business performance improvement. Friends, if you feel that you need consulting to grow your business, feel free to approach us. So with this introduction of Mr. Kaundinya and Ray Consulting, I'll straight go to Mr. Kaundinya. Sir, let me start. Today being a Teacher's Day. You are one of my teachers, as I mentioned to you earlier. So why don't you start speaking something about your teachers?
Well, thank you very much, Raj. It's very nice of you to have me here today, and also for the elaborate introduction. Um, Teachers' Day is very special because of the reasons you mentioned. So let me start with my parents, because parents are the first teachers for anyone, in any case, right?
Yes.
So parents actually gave me this body, this IQ, this whatever I am today is because of my parents. So, and they taught me many lessons. Out of that, I think from my father, I learned the importance of integrity and hard work, which I have carried throughout my life. And from my mother, I learned the importance of compassion, which again I carried throughout my life. I think they have been actually, they had a phenomenal impact on me. We are 8 siblings, 8 children for my parents. So it's a big family. So I learned, so life is a continuous process of learning. So I learned from each one of them. Our eldest brother is a professor in Banaras Hindu University. So he set the stage for all of us for scholastic excellence. So following him as a role model, we all did very well in education. That is a big asset that our parents gave us. So, in addition to that, the regular schools, my college at IIM Ahmedabad, there were many teachers who I should remember, but that's a long list, so I don't want to go into that list. But they made a huge impact on the way my personality was developed and the way my knowledge accumulation has happened. So I will be remembering them today and giving my salutations to all of them today. But in my career, I had two major gurus who helped me in guiding me. And so, first one of them is Mr. Unni, KK Unni, who was the head of our division in Health. And from him, I learned three important things. One is passion for work. Whatever you do, you must do with great passion, because half-hearted work is not something that we must do. So that is something I learned from him. Second is that pride of being an agriculture graduate. When you are working in the field of agriculture, you must keep um, the, 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 the reason for your job, the reason for your work is something beyond your job. So that is something which we all should understand. And that is a pride that I take in my work. And leading teams, he was a phenomenal leader of teams, and I learned a lot of tricks from him on how to actually lead the teams and make them produce results. So he is my first guru in the career. The second guru is one Mr. Baldev Arora. He was my boss in Cyanamide. So from him, I learned the importance of having systems and processes in place, having financial results as a target always, and achieving the results. And third is the discipline of running an organization. So these are a few things. I think these 6 things that I learned from the two gurus actually helped me throughout my career. And if there is a style of management that I have, it is a combination of these two that I learned. I was also fortunate to be on a committee headed by Dr. Swaminathan, which defined the biotech policy for the country. I was on a committee headed by Dr. Paroda, which you mentioned, which suggested measures for transforming Indian agriculture. I learned so much from them, and they're real gurus of agriculture. So we don't have to even qualify that. They're real big people. So I was very fortunate to actually take their blessings. There are so many friends, in life. Your personality develops by picking up small pieces from each one of the persons you meet. So there were so many friends who influenced me, who helped me in shaping my career and in shaping my personality. I think that is a very important contribution which many of my friends made. Finally, life is the biggest teacher. Life itself is a big teacher. Every day in life, you keep learning, because you have to be a student throughout your life. That is a very important thing. So I always say that life and wife both are very important teachers on a daily basis. So you keep learning from them, and that is a very important source of learning for us all our life. So I salute all my gurus, my parents on this day. I'm here because of them, and I always feel that gratefulness towards all those great people who taught me and who molded me and who mentored me. So coming to my family, as I mentioned, my father was a revenue department official. He retired as the revenue divisional officer. I grew up in East Godavari district of Andhra Pradesh. So at Amalapuram, where he worked, I did some of my education there. Then he went and worked as a manager of a sugar factory at a place called Pithapuram near Kakinada. That's where I did my balanced education. So my first standard to 12th standard, I did at these two places. And then I moved to Bapatla Agriculture College, where I did my agriculture. So you asked this question, why did I choose agriculture? Right? Because that is a question which many people ask me, that why did you get into agriculture? So first I must say that I will be telling a lie if I say that I was so inspired by agriculture or I wanted to serve the farmers and things like that. There was nothing like that. I did reasonably well in my +2, and my family is full of engineers and mathematics wizards. So I took biological sciences for a change. Well, and then agriculture those days it offered good job opportunities. So I think that's one of the main reasons I guess I went for agriculture. And but once I joined, I developed a lot of liking for the subject. So much so that in the 4 years I was there, I had a very impressive CPA of 4 out of 4. So when the maximum was 4, I got 4 out of 4 in all the 4 years. That means all the exams conducted in all the 4 years, I got A grade. So it was it's
You had
because
four,
I liked the subject.
Sorry, you had 4 out of 4 in your OGPA.
Yeah,
oh my
correct.
God,
Correct.
outstanding,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah. Well, so that was so that's what I'm saying, that it was a
Whoa.
it was a
and from Bapatla it is impossible as far as my knowledge goes. Getting from Bapatla is something
was,
very tough.
It was a very good college, very highly respected college. So I take a lot of pride in that achievement. Then from there, of course, I went to IIM Ahmedabad, and then I did MBA with specialization. IIM Ahmedabad, my teachers at Bapatla were very disappointed, especially Dr. Satyanarayan Reddy, who was my entomology professor. He is the father of Dr. Guruva Reddy, who is the orthopedic surgeon here. So Dr. Satyanarayan Reddy, he was very upset actually when I told him that I was going to IIM Ahmedabad. He said, I thought you will do MSc, you will do PhD and get into research, because with a 4 out of 4 OGPA, you should be going into research. But anyway, I think destiny took me into IIM Ahmedabad. So I found myself in the commercial world. But at heart, I'm still a researcher. I think that element still remains, the way I study subjects and the way I go into all the details, and the way I have been able to retain my, what you call in Sanskrit as the jignasa. That is the inquisitiveness has always been continuing. So that's briefly about my background and why I went into agriculture and what happened there.
Great. That's pre-professional days. Now let me come to your professional thing. You know, it's a biography. Now you will take us through. Sir, you've been in the pesticide industry for more than 20 years, 25 years. So how was your experience in the pesticide industry? Where you started in your initial days? And in your view, what are the changes this industry has undergone since you joined and up to now?
Yeah, so I joined in 1979, the pesticide industry after IIM Ahmedabad. I first started with a small company called Hyderabad Chemicals, which later on became a very big company. My friend Sukumar built it up into a very big company. But I was there only for a year, but my real career started in Hearst when I joined them as management trainee in 1980. And 21 years I was there in that industry. And when I left that industry, I was the managing director of Cyanamide. So it was a very good career growth that I had in that industry. But I learned so much in that particular 20 years of time. You know, the entire marketing how to actually sell to farmers, how to demonstrate products to the farmers, how to actually even create product management concepts, how to position products, how to create marketing campaigns, and how to lead high quality teams, because these are all, we had very high quality teams in both the companies that I worked. So leading a high quality team itself is a skill that you need. So that was always a very big learning for me, and it was all very very rich experience for me. Then I went into, as I got into general management in Cyanamide, I went into manufacturing, I went into supply chain. People management was always an area of great interest for me throughout my career there. So it's a very rich experience. But as an industry, during this period, uh, the industry has evolved during that period. Technology had undergone a change. If you remember 79, when I started, we used to still sell DDT and BHC, right?
Yes.
They were the products that time. So DDT and BHC were the products that time. And synthetic pyrethroids came in 1982. I would call it as a major milestone during that time. Synthetic pyrethroids actually changed the entire bollworm management situation, and so that actually dramatically changed the bollworm management situation. But it was so effective, and they were quite safe products compared to BHC, DDT, and all these products. But they were so good that farmers overused them, and which led to a huge flare up of sucking pests. I don't know, some of you may remember that 1987,
Yeah.
86, 87, there was a huge flare up of sucking pests. Guntur and Prakasham districts had a major issue of farmer suicides and things like that. So we had to actually, as an industry, come up with resistance management tools and alternating schedules of products with different modes of action for management of resistance. On a war footing, we had to do this, and government also was very keen, and they helped us with that. So it was a basically a learning the industry, whole industry had with that. And during that period, only Government of India gave an emergency approval for 4 products, new products for control of sucking.
Yes.
Similarly, isoprotron in wheat, again an emergency registration which was given in 1980 for control of Phalaris minor, which was becoming a national pest. It's a major weed problem. I participated in that new product launch in 1980. It was a wonderful experience working in Punjab and Haryana for promoting that product. I didn't know Hindi, going from South. Although I knew
Oh.
Hindi, but I was not conversant to talk to the farmers in Hindi. So my boss, Mr. Unni, so he decided that since you can't speak anyway, so you better do demonstrations. So I was made in charge of demonstrations, where I didn't have to speak much. I sprayed a lot of fields myself. I don't know how many IIM graduates will actually do that today, but I had a backpack and then I sprayed some of the fields, because spraying itself was a demonstration. How to spray isoprotron was a technique which we had to teach the farmers. So it was there was no need to speak, and it was actually quite a phenomenal experience I had with that. Then when I was in Cyanamide, I am very proud of the fact that we identified the opportunity for a post-emergent weedside market in soybean. Because when we were visiting the central part of Madhya Pradesh, particularly, the farmers had this problem that if there is a good rain, the field was full of weeds and they didn't know how to control them. I mean, there was no way the labor could control it, could pluck the weeds. So we identified that opportunity and we developed the post-emergent market on soybean for the first time. Our team did that, and I'm very proud of that. We introduced this product called Imazethapir in soybean. The entire regulatory work we did, and then the entire product launch with safeners and all that. So it was a huge experience. And that market, I understood that later on after I left that industry, it grew to a huge market, almost 600, 700, 800 crores market it grew up to. So it's a big impact that we could make. So as an industry, I think tox profile of the products that are being used has improved over this 22, 23 years when I was there. And since then also, it underwent a huge change. safer products which were used in smaller dosages and which were better for the environment and better for human safety, animal safety. They all came into picture. I understand that the trend continued and it continues to be like that, that products are getting replaced with safer and newer products. It is natural that the old technologies must give way to new technologies. I think that is something which must happen. Many times I think that especially when we hear some of the activists talking against pesticides, I feel that many of them don't know that Dr. Paul Herman Muller was who discovered DDT during Second World War for controlling insects for the soldiers, when they were on the front. He got a Nobel Prize in 1948 for his discovery, right? So you have a situation where the discovery of DDT got a Nobel Prize in 1948, but by 1978, 79, it was considered to be a taboo. It was considered to be a very bad product for the environment and for safety and things like that. So it can happen that products do become obsolete. Products do get replaced by safer products over a period of time as new technologies come, new chemistry comes in. The research activity that goes on continuously brings new products. So that doesn't mean that you don't use products which are currently available, because your future will bring better products, but that doesn't mean that you don't use existing products, existing technologies. I think that is where every product and every technology has a time and space under which it operates. So that is a fact which we all must understand and all must respect. So during my period in the industry, I was also the chairman of Indian Crop Protection Association, ICPA it was called. It is the previous version of CropLife. I was there for 2 years as the chairman, 98 to 2000. So we did some excellent work during that time on promoting safe use of pesticides and the training of doctors for, first aid treatment of, pesticide poisoning and things like that. So it is actually a very rich experience I had. Because as an industry association lead also, I had that responsibility to actually go to the government for policy advocacy work and also convince my industry friends to actually bring those kind of products. If you remember, we didn't have product patents that time. Product patents came after TRIPS in 1996. So companies were very reluctant to bring new products. This was the situation till even the year 2000. It is only after 2000 that companies started bringing new products because product patents came into picture. So I think it was a phenomenal journey we had. Convincing headquarters to bring new products used to be also a heavy, very, very difficult task. So I think we went through all that, but it's a very rich experience. I am very happy that whatever I had undergone during that period was actually, it added to my subsequent work in terms of the richness I could bring into the work when I moved into the seed industry. So that I would say is briefly about my experience in pesticide industry.
I think you mentioned about 87, 88 when these 4 products were launched and there was an issue of Heliothis. So that's the time when I joined my career, started my career with Rallis R&D.
Okay.
Today is the famous Advenus. Thanks to my guru then, Dr. R.K. Mishra, Dr. Mithyanatha, Dr. Shiv Shankaran. So they laid a foundation for me to be in this industry. As you rightly said, most of us probably we didn't have a choice. But once we joined agriculture, I think desh ka culture ban jata hai wo apne liye. Awesome. Now, see, very rarely a person has got a role where you spend 20, 22, 25 years in pure pesticide, agrochemicals. And what a paradigm shift from pesticide to seed. And I would say, if I were you, probably that time I would have thought, कि भाई ये तो seed industry तो नया है, it just started. I've been very cozy, comfortable, well established, managing director of a multinational, and going into the totally new domain, seed industry. What has been your experience for, again, similar experience, 22, 25 years in seed industry? So what are the changes? I'm sure when you, I won't say that what are the changes you have seen. Probably you are also part of the change you have brought in.
Yeah.
So what is the changes you brought in or have seen in the seed industry? It's amazing, 20 years back seed industry was nowhere. Today it's one of the fastest and best in the country. Please take us through that.
Yeah, so when I moved from pesticide industry to seed industry, it was actually difficult to move because in 98, when I became managing director of Cyanamide, I was only 42. I was the youngest managing director in the industry at that time, especially for a multinational company. And of course, there was an opportunity for me to get into seed industry. What actually forced me to take the decision was also the fact that by then GM crops had come in at the global level, not in India, but at the global level. And we had seen, I saw the impact of GM crops on Cyanomide's own business in US when they faced huge challenges to face Roundup Ready technology on soybean. So I understood that there is a phenomenon that was taking place of an integration of pesticides and seeds. Value transfer was partly happening from pesticides to seeds because BT was actually eliminating the need for pesticides or reducing the need, I should say, not eliminate. And Roundup Ready was actually making a complete displacement of existing weedicides with some new technology. And so both were actually game changers. So I understood that there is a new relationship building up between pesticides field and seeds field, which were very different and very much apart from each other till then. So that actually helped me to take the decision. I thought that seed industry and biotech industry was a sunrise industry at that point of time in the year 2000 when I moved. 2000 end only I moved, but it was a sunrise industry clearly. And I saw that opportunity. Then, of course, I had very good discussions with the partners from Emergent Genetics who wanted to start their operations in India. Otherwise, I was actually on a transfer to Indonesia because from Cyanamide, BASF acquired Cyanamide and I was posted to Indonesia. I was supposed to move there, but around that time, this happened and then I moved. So I think seed industry movement, in fact, I should say that all my career moves, and this is something I wanted to say in the end, but I might as well say it now, that all my career moves, when I went from Hex to Cyanamide or from pesticide industry to seed industry, each of my moves actually added value to me in terms of my own experiences, my own skills, and the way I could look at the world. Each of the moves actually gave me that benefit. So coming to the seed industry, I think the most important milestone that I have seen is the introduction of BT cotton, which happened in 2002. That was actually a game changer again, which actually transformed Indian cotton industry from an cotton importing country. We became a cotton exporting country. But I should also say that in spite of the success, the most disappointing moment of my seed industry career is the imposition of moratorium on BT brinjal in 2010. So this was something which I didn't expect and which actually has set the clock back for technological development in the seed and biotech industry. And for no scientific reasons, it was all mostly if you see the 19-page order which put the moratorium, there was more of other reasons than scientific reasons for that. But be it as maybe, because we have to carry some of these things with us when we are dealing with the government and government policy. So cotton has been a phenomenal success. So yields have doubled. We have increased our production from 13 million bales to 39 million bales. Now it is stationed around 36. And we became the largest producer in the world. We became the largest exporter in the world. Even today, we export around $4 billion worth of cotton. So it's a phenomenal success. So that is clearly the first milestone. And I was fortunate that I had a good exposure to that when I was in Emergent. I had good technical interactions and good understanding of the technology during that period. And I played a role also because during that period only I was a part of Swaminathan committee, which defined the biotech policy. Then I could interact with a lot of regulators and various other things that were going on. I was also president of the Seed Association of India at the time. And so various things happened during that time. The second milestone I must mention is the introduction of PPV and FR Act in 2002, which is the first IP Act which came in seed industry. So the PPV and FR Act was long awaited because research investments will not come unless you have a protection for your research output. So that was the concept with which we were working with the government. So it's very good that this act came in 2002. By the time it got implemented, rules were framed and it got implemented, it was almost 2004, 2005. But that has actually improved investments in the seed research. You know that as a country, we don't invest enough in seed research. While the global benchmark is around 10 to 12% of revenue, Indian seed industry invests hardly 3 to 4% of the revenue, which is very low. This is also something we have been trying to push up, but it needs government support in terms of intellectual property protection and management, and also some kind of a support for research-based companies. So this is also something on which we have been working. So that is still WIP. But the PPV and FR Act was a big game changer again for this industry. I should also say that during this period, two major crops development has taken a phenomenal shape. First is hybrid corn. I think the growth of hybrid corn market in the last 20 years is again very, very great and phenomenal growth we have seen. I could never imagine when I came to the industry that the Bihar farmer will buy the highest priced seed and the best inputs and produce the highest yield in the country. The best corn today is produced by the Bihar farmer. So who would have imagined this 20 years back? So I think that is something which, that is the beauty of this industry, that we could change the lives of farmers. We could change the economic landscape of a particular state. You know, soybean changed the landscape of Madhya Pradesh. Similarly, corn changed the landscape of Bihar. So this hybrid corn market was developed by some of the companies. I think they did a fantastic job of promoting hybrid corn in some of the parts of India. And today we are a self-sufficient country for corn. And what has happened is that during this 20-year period, a lot of income increases happened for the middle class, and demand actually increased substantially for food. Our population increased and demand increased. We were only 100 crores in the year 2000. So now demand has gone up substantially. Poultry industry's growth has gone up substantially during this period, multiplied. So they needed corn. So this entire thing actually coincided. It was like one feeding into the other. So I think it was actually quite a great phenomenon that has happened. Same thing happened with the vegetables market. But you know, even vegetable seeds market has undergone a phenomenal change during this period. And hybridization has happened in all the crops like cotton. You know, cotton, you all know that the cotton used to be out of 9 million hectares, we had only 5 million hectares of hybrid before technology came in. Now the entire 9 million hectares has gone to 12 million hectares, and then the whole thing is hybrid. Hybridization of maize has happened, hybridization of vegetables has happened. So all this actually has increased the yields and helped the country to feed the population. This is something, so I would say that these kind of technologies not only help the farmer, but they also help the consumer, because if the sufficient supply is not there, either consumers have to cut back on their needs, or they have to pay high price, because then we would have imported all this stuff. You know, so it would have been a very different scenario in the country if all this increase had not happened. So I would say maize, vegetables, cotton, these are all fantastic success stories. Of course, hybrid rice also came during that period. but hybrid rice growth has been a bit more contained, not like maize and vegetables. So I think that is, but I am also very happy that of late in many crops, the market for research varieties is going up, which is actually a good indicator about the maturity of the market. Market is maturing definitely. We have seen a lot of M&A activity in the last 20 years in the seed industry. Many companies have been bought. Many companies have come in. I think it was good for many Indian companies who could monetize their investments and who could monetize all the hard work they did before. And the market has actually been upgraded because of many of this M&A activity. Companies went to the stock market. Also, the valuations went up. I think it is a very good time for the seed industry. I myself did 8 acquisitions during this period. So out of 8, and I did it all over the world. I did 1 in Australia. We did 3 in US, then in India. So it was a great experience, doing all this. So I would say that it has been a great experience in the seed sector, in spite of what the activists say that the GM technology is bad, and even now you are seeing that GM brinjal trials have been approved by the government, and already there is a campaign going on against it. So it is a continuous process, even in countries where GM technology has been introduced since 1996. Still, that activity still goes on against the technology. I think we have to live with that, but we should remember that we missed the bus in BT Brinjal, Bangladesh. That bus picked up Bangladesh on the way, and then Bangladesh has actually been benefited because of that. So it's high time that testing is allowed, and this is what we keep asking the government, that safety of GM foods is proved beyond doubt through thousands of studies all over the world. And if you stop testing, you stop progress. So if you don't test, you will never know whether it is good or bad or ugly. So I think testing must continue. So finally, I would say that technology must be used for its benefits. Each technology has a role. We need a basket of technologies. This is what we keep saying, even with the government, that no single technology can solve all the problems. No single technology is a silver bullet, whether it is hybrids or GM or organic or pesticides or fertilizers, whatever it is. You need a basket. You need a mix. You need a schedule of each technology being used where it gives you the best results. This is what is more important than just throwing away some technologies or adapting only one technology across the country. That will never happen, because Indian agriculture is so varied and there is so much of diversity. You can't have one technology all over the country in all the crops. So those are a few thoughts on the seed industry. And my journey in the seed industry. Of course, my journey is still continuing. And in the seed industry, I am sure future will be even better for the seed industry. I'm hoping that things will even become better in the future.
So you have seen, literally seed industry in a parallel way, not only, growth, but bringing so many changes. As you rightly mentioned, this is one industry was brought, not only the good thing for the farmers in terms of revenue, but offered consumers a lot of good things. Right from the varieties to the way we consume is totally changed now. So you 20 plus in pesticide, 20 plus in seed, and still batting. You come from a East Godavari district, dusty towns and things, and then taking over as a global CEO of Advanta, mergers and acquisitions, and multicultural people to work with, not only to work with your customers. So what was your experience as a global CEO of Advanta, and especially managing different cultural people, or the way they work with you or you work with them?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, when I joined Advanta, it was also something different for me, because like till then, all my experience was with multinationals. And when I joined Advanta, it was a part of UPL. So I was joining an Indian group for the first time. But Advanta was a global company. It was a Dutch company. which was acquired by UPL. So when I joined, the entire working of the company was more like what it used to be before UPL acquired it. UPL acquired it in February 2006, and I joined in July 2006 as the global CEO. I took over from a Britisher who used to lead it till then. And of course, UPL bought part of the global business. Some Europe and the US were not there. So we started off with Australia being the most important country, with more than 50% of our business coming from Australia. So it was then later we did acquisitions in US, and then so the business extended between Australia, Thailand, Indonesia, Indian subcontinent, parts of Africa, and then US through acquisitions, and South America was a very big market for us. So I had to travel to all these places. It involved almost 2 weeks of travel every month on international routes, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Just to add, you have been a pure vegetarian. How did you manage? You can add that also to this.
What is that?
I said you are a vegetarian, I believe.
Oh yeah, correct. Yeah, I know. It was. I was very worried about that initially, but I think once my people knew that I was a vegetarian, and in many places they could make the arrangements. Mostly, I used to eat Italian food because that's where you get most of the vegetarian options. The pastas and pizzas were the most reported ones everywhere. There were very few countries where it was very difficult. Like you go to Brazil or you go to some of the African countries, it is very difficult. But you will get some salads and something like that. So I did manage.
It was, you never made any no fuzzy about the thing.
No, and I never carried food from home. And,
really?
And I never liked going to Indian restaurants there because that Indian food is very different, and I never liked that Indian food. So wherever I went, I ate the local food. That was actually, and mostly Italian food I used to eat. So it was fine. And 8 years I did that. So maybe that helped me to keep my weight under control. That also actually might have helped me. So, but it was a wonderful experience. I had management styles were very different between countries and between continents. You know, we in India, we are used to somewhat of a jugaad style of management. You know, we do manage to manage actually many times. And but many of these countries, see, Asians have a very different style of management, whether it is India or Indonesia or Thailand or whatever it is. We are more emotional. We are more paternalistic in our management style, and we are also good at managing crisis. You see, the beauty of our management style is that we are good at managing crisis because we can think like this. You know, we don't have to think very straight. We are trained like that. Whereas some of these countries like Australians or US or South Americans are slightly a mix between our style and their style, but US and Europeans and Australians, they think very straight. You know, their mind is conditioned in a particular way of thinking. So for them to handle a jigsaw type of a movement is not so easy. So for them, a plan is a plan. To create a plan, then you stick to the plan. You know, I used to have a research head coming from Argentina, and he used to tell me that I go anywhere, I have no problem. But I come to India and then I sit with your team for 5 days, I prepare a plan. By the time I reach the airport, they have changed the plan. Because it is like that. No, our management style is like that. Sometimes we're very flexible. Actually, that is a good part. We are very flexible, but sometimes we are too flexible, and then it becomes slightly difficult for us. But I think they work with a very defined framework of their mind, and that is an advantage, and that is also a disadvantage sometimes. But they are very open, and what is in their mind is on their lips. When they speak, you know that it is in his mind or her mind. In our case, that is not the case. When somebody says something, you have to read between the lines. You have to understand what is in the mind. What is he saying? Is he saying what is in his mind? So this kind of a thing is very stark difference between us and their styles. Same thing when we did acquisitions. We did acquisitions in India, we did acquisitions in US and Australia. There also in the negotiations, when you discuss with the seller, and most of them are family businesses. So whatever we bought were all family businesses. So the way they talk and the way they actually do the stuff is very different. And they're very clinical in drafting their contracts. One thing we must say is that they are very finicky about sticking to their contractual obligations. Once they sign a contract, they will make a lot of fuss before signing. But once they sign a contract, they don't try to beat you around that contract. They will try to discharge all their obligations under the contract, and they don't make any, shortcuts and things like that to cheat you on that. So that is, those are, there are many examples like what we did, but finally we made Advanta the largest sorghum seed company in the world. That was the big achievement we could do. Advanta was a leader in the tropical corn markets of the world, which also was something which we could do. And we became leaders in the canola market in Australia, which was again a big achievement. We handled the GM technologies in many countries. So all that actually was done, and it's a very good experience. I must say that I would not have got such an experience otherwise. It was, I have to also thank UPL for giving me that opportunity, but I thoroughly enjoyed that. It was also not easy for me to adjust personally because I never worked outside India. I was always in India, working in India till then. So suddenly to go and manage all these people, I had about more than 10 people reporting to me from across the world. And when you said today's call is at 4 o'clock, I was remembering that because we used to have global calls at 4 o'clock. This is the most suitable time for everybody, because for Australia, it is around 9 o'clock in the night. And then for Argentina, it is morning time, 7 o'clock. So it was always very suitable for us at 4 o'clock. So we did manage. I think it was a good run we had. There are always better things that can be done. I think they have also done very well afterwards. This is one of the things I say, that a leader, there are many leaders who say that if I leave this company will collapse. And they think that it is something great that they're doing. But if any leader says that, that means he is a terrible leader, because once a leader leaves, the company should prosper, because if you have built systems, if you have created systems, and if you have built strength in the country, in the company, that company should progress even after you leave. So I'm very happy that Advanta has progressed and they have made a mark. They have grown very well in India. I'm very happy about that. So I think it was a very good experience in Advanta.
That's amazing. A lot of experience, as I said, as you've said, you've been all the time in India, now globally, people reporting to you, and they look forward to your guidance and leadership. Sir, one thing I would like to mention is that you mentioned about 4 o'clock time. That's really correct. So that's the reason why we have Ray Talks at 4 p.m. every Saturday. More or less, it suits globally, plus or minus 1 or 2 hours here and there, but it certainly works for everything. Now, I think a lot of things from your personal, corporate approach. Since you're also now involved, not now, from the beginning, you're involved into policies also. You're influencing in many ways the government's thought process in implementing policies and stuff like that. You've been in the team with Dr. Baroda and submitted the recommendations. Now, let me move from corporate to government or the policies. What's your opinion about the recent reforms announced in agriculture government of India, especially in these COVID times?
No, they're fantastic. In fact, I always say that this is a 91 phenomenon. 1991 liberalization, what happened, has happened in agriculture now. We have been asking for this for, I don't know, donkey's years. Must have been more than 20, 25 years we have been asking for this. That the farmers should be free to sell wherever they like. and that private competition must come into the system so that farmers will realize a better price. So I think this is something which, so there were three major things they have announced. First is that Essential Commodities Act, they not scrapped it, but they said it will not apply to the stock limits will not be there. So private industry can get into the thing now, and they can build warehouses, they can buy large volumes, and they can trade in large volumes, which makes them a competitor for governments, FCIs, and all these things. Second is that farmers are allowed to sell outside the mandis now, and they can sell to anybody in the country, which again brings in private competition into the system. And of course, those who go through mandi will still go through mandi. I mean, so there is that way there is no conflict. But some of the business will come to the private trade, and private trade can invest. And government also simultaneously announced 1 lakh crores of funds for setting up farm gate infrastructure, which will help private people to set up large drying yards or warehouses, private mandis, logistics, various things, cold storages, so many things can happen with that money. Of course, 1 lakh crores is not enough. I'm sure government will improve and increase that money. Then the third thing they have done is that they have allowed a kind of a contract farming. They said the companies can make contracts with farmers, and so that there is a closed loop system. Once you have a closed loop system, many things can happen. Banks can give money, there is a certainty of how the output is sold, and then the banks can recover their loans much better. And farmers can get better prices because all the middlemen are eliminated. So I think this is fantastic. But I don't think this will happen overnight. This will take some time because the entire capacity building work has to be done. Farmers cannot suddenly become commercially savvy that they can make all these contracts and things like that. So they need a lot of hand holding. This is where I see a lot of opportunity for private enterprise to actually go in and then help the farmers through this process, handhold them, and maybe charge them something for it. But it is possible for young entrepreneurs who are educated and who are well versed, who can get trained actually in this, to do this. And second thing is that FPOs will become very important in this whole equation. Because if you are an FPO, then you carry much better strength than an individual farmer. As an FPO, you can negotiate contracts better, then you are able to also train your farmers better. You can put in place various processes and infrastructure which will help all your members. So I think even FPOs need a lot of training. They need a lot of capacity building, because FPOs also will not suddenly become commercially savvy organizations. No, they also need a lot of training. But I think it will happen. It will take 2-3 years for this to actually settle down into a regular rhythm. That rhythm must come. Then it is a takeoff. Then I think by 2023, 24, the takeoff will happen. I am very happy with that.
So now, see, you're so happy with the reforms, and as a visionary, where you feel that agriculture will move next 10 years, what are those mega trends which you feel will come over or have to be defined for the future of agriculture and food?
You see, one of the important things and one of the important criticisms against agriculture is that agriculture leaves an environmental footprint. Right, so we use a lot of chemicals, we use fertilizers which damage the soil, we use pesticides which leave residues in the foods, so water contamination and things like that. So I think one of the things which will happen, and I think this will happen for good, is that there should be a lot of emphasis on reducing the environmental footprint of agriculture. Okay, so this is something which will happen. I think in the next 10 years, we will see some major changes in this. This will lead to more efficient use of natural resources like water and soil. I think crops like crops which need less water will gain importance, like our millets and things like that. crops which need more water, like rice, for example, you need 5,000 liters of rice to produce 1 kilo of rice, which is actually quite a disaster if you look at the use of water. And then we export that rice, so it is again another disaster. So I think some of these things will have to get set properly. So direct seeded rice, which reduces water consumption, should get more importance, and I think it will get more importance. And some of the technologies also will help in that. Weed management technologies should help direct seeded rice, because otherwise the farmer won't be able to control weeds in that. I think some of those things will happen. So natural resource management, like soil and water, and efficient use of natural resources and reduced environmental footprint will be one major trend I foresee. Second is the climate change. I think we have to take into account that next 10 years onwards, even now onwards, it may be for next 20 years, I should say, climate change will be our biggest challenge. Because every 1 degree rise in temperature will lead to drastic fall in crop yields. There is a paper published on this which shows that this could lead to 30% reduction in crop yields with every 1 degree increase in temperature. Some of the crops, it varies from crop to crop. Temperate crops will lose more compared to tropical crops. So climate change is going to be a major challenge. So that means we need climate resilient agriculture, which needs that we need that type of varieties. We need that type of, so seed industry has a lot of work to do to bring such varieties into operation. And also various other agronomic practices, which will actually help us to fight climate change, like temperatures and things like that. That is the second trend I foresee. Third is that changing food habits. The food habits are undergoing a huge change, and they will undergo more change in the next 10 to 15 years. You know, Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which all governments have signed up to, they're supposed to deliver them by 2030. So SDG number 12 talks of consumption and production, responsible consumption and responsible production. Production follows consumption. This we must keep in mind, that it is the consumption which creates the demand for production, right? So unless as consumers we become more responsible, the production will remain inefficient. So I think we as consumers, also food habits will undergo a change. I think a lot of emphasis is there on plant-based nutrition now. Moving from animal-based nutrition to plant-based nutrition is a phenomenon which will pick up much more speed, especially after COVID, because you need nutrition and the resistance, immunity in your body. And this can happen through better quality proteins and better quality plant-based foods. I think that is another plant-based nutrition, changing food habits, which will lead to change in the cropping patterns and the crop portfolios around the world. I distinctly foresee that happening in the next 10 to 15 years time. Another thing that that will happen is that yield improvements. The emphasis on yield improvements will be very high, because we should know that almost 1 billion people, 800 million actually, 800 million people today in the world don't get 2 meals a day. Many of them, 800 million people go to bed hungry. This is what they say in terms of UN statistics. So the food security, when we say food security, has to address availability, and also it must address affordability. You can't have expensive food being produced for everybody, because people can't afford such expensive food. So still a lot of people will be below poverty line around the world. Even in India, we have almost 25% of our population is still below poverty line. So the bottom of the pyramid will still need high yields, low priced, large volume production. So that will continue. I don't foresee that going away in the next 15, 20 years, because poverty will not go away in the next 15, 20 years. So I think that is something which will still continue. So while there will be a segmentation of the market, and the upper layers will move more and more towards nutrition and plant-based nutrition and specialized foods and things like that. the lower part, which is the bottom of the pyramid, will continue to need large volumes of food at affordable price. I think that is something, this dichotomy will continue. This dichotomy will only get completely eliminated, may not happen in the next 50 years also. I don't foresee that happening. And mechanization and digitization will be another big trend that I foresee. I think farms have to get mechanized because labor availability will not be there. Even what we have today also will not be there. Not only in India, I think all over the world that is a phenomenon. So mechanization is very important. When you need mechanization, you need varieties which are suitable for mechanization. That means seed industry again has a role to play there. They have to develop varieties, the plant architecture which helps in mechanized cultivation. Because mechanization is also a precursor, and this point came out in the conference you conducted on DAIC. So this point came out very clearly that mechanization is a precursor for digitization. If you are not mechanizing, you won't be able to digitize so much. I think that is also something, both mechanization and digitization will go hand in hand, and that is also something which will happen. In general, farmers' situation will improve. I foresee that, but they will never be equal to their urban counterparts, because the urban consumer all over the world always has an upper hand in terms of government's, government always tries to keep consumer price index low, and so they will always have a treatment. Like I said, FPOs will play a very key role. That is another thing. But another important trend I foresee is the new supply chain systems will come into place. I think supply chain systems will become more and more efficient. They will become shorter. The farmer and the consumer will get connected through shorter supply chains compared to what we have today. Today, I think we have 5-6 layers in that. That should get down to at least 2 layers. And the farmers should get at least 60% of the consumer price. This is the target with which people are moving. That currently the farmer gets only 25-30% of what you and I pay when we buy something. Can the farmer get 60% of what we pay is something which we are all targeting, and that is a policy which is also being driven towards that. All these reforms which they have announced recently are also going to influence the supply chain systems modification, and that will actually help in increasing the farmers' share in the consumer price. That is also something which will happen. And I also foresee that India will become a very large exporter of agricultural commodities and food items. Currently, our share is not so high, but I think we will become. I think that is also one of the ways in which we can increase our farmers' incomes if we are able to export the surplus, and not only surplus, but we should produce for export purposes. That also will actually give the farmers better price. So this market connection, when we say market access for farmers, market access is not only for domestic markets, but it is also for export markets. I think, but the farmer has to become competitive. So this competitiveness of the farmer will depend on the technologies we use. This is a simple fact. It is like when the British came with their with the cannons and all that, the Indian kings fighting with swords. It is no match. I mean, you can't fight cannons with swords, right? So similarly, you can't fight international competition from farmers who are using modern technologies by using old technologies here. So if you have to increase our share in the global trade, and if we have to increase our exports, we have to bring modern technology into. So science and technology will play a huge role. This is also something which policy makers do understand. But like everything else in India, these things take time, because politically to take some of the decisions, it takes time. But I'm very hopeful that this will happen, and this should also be one of the key features for the next 10 to 15 years. Those are a few things that I thought I could list out under that.
Yeah, I mean, I could feel that, 10 years from now, or from the agriculture would look like based on your thing. One of the things which we are trying to say, as you mentioned, that for example, from an exports point of view, said instead of not only exporting the surplus, but you make like the way we make goods for the export. Similarly, crops,
Yes.
produce should be produced for the exports. So what we are trying to promote is like from farm to fork. Why not we look from fork to farm? As you rightly said, consumer plays a very important role. So
demand-driven agriculture. We call it demand-driven agriculture.
Demand-driven agriculture.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we look into that aspect.
Right.
Sir, time is just moving.
Flying, yeah.
And I'll tell you something. I don't know if you have a thing. We have, of course, we have our regular loyal attendees, but today I would say we have premium attendees. Who is on this show, including Mr. Unni. I will.
Oh, great,
yeah,
great.
He's joined us too.
Hello,
with
Mr. Unni, yeah.
Deepika, his daughter. The entire thing, the Tarak is here from what do you call
Nujividu.
Nujividu. So he has
Yeah,
put back a couple of questions, and we'll
Okay.
see if we can interact. I will put 2 more questions to you,
Okay.
which are not directly related to your past, but probably current and something very few people do. And then my friends, audience, I will take some questions from you. There are already few questions, but maybe after 5-10 minutes, once I finish my chatting with Mr. Kaundinya, you will also have a chance to speak to him directly. So whoever has got some questions, maybe after a few minutes, you please raise your hands in the participants block. So I'll allow you to unmute and speak to him. So now you started something, co-founded something, ThinkAg.
Yeah.
Say something about it.
So ThinkAg is a platform that the 4 of us have created. I, along with 3 others, Ritu Verma of Ankur Capital, Hemendra Mathur, also a well-known name in the startup space, and Raman Ahuja, who is also a consultant and worked with the Levers before. We felt that what NASSCOM did in the IT sector, or what Google did in the IT sector, of promoting startups and new tech enterprises, we are not having such a system in agri-tech. So agri-tech is coming up in a big way because digital technologies are developing. There are a lot of technically qualified people who are coming and developing some of these tools which will be useful for the farmer. But for them to reach the farmer and for those people to actually scale them up, there is a need for an ecosystem. So this ThinkAg is a platform on which we are bringing various players together, the incubators, the innovators, the agri-tech startups, and funds who will actually invest in them. Not only that, we felt that corporates must come in, because this is something which happened in the case of IT sector, that corporates must come in, set up their relationships with these startups, invest in them if they find them interesting. But there should be a platform to bring all of them together, to create knowledge, to create that depth of understanding of the subject, to conduct research. So all these targets are there. We started this in September 2018. So it's now almost 2 years. So it has been going on very well. We held some of the meetings, and we have created a report recently. We have released a report just 2 weeks back on the landscape of agri-tech investments in India. So that becomes a reference book for anybody who wants to invest in agri-tech. And we do what is called curation of some of these startups. We present them to some of the corporates and some of the people. So now we have started getting good traction on this. We have corporates as members, and we also have almost 100 startups whom we are in touch with, and we keep curating them, and we keep presenting them to some of these startups. So I think it is a small way we started. We know that this should actually create an ecosystem over a period of time. Hopefully, in the next, and it is badly needed for in the next 5-6 years. I think startups, agri-tech, food tech, and fintech startups in agriculture will play a crucial role in reducing farmers' drudgery, improving his post-harvest management, connecting him to markets, getting him sound advisory when he is actually cultivating the crop. So I think all this is possible, and then we are hopeful that ThinkAg should contribute in that direction.
Now, something which I never knew was that you're also involved in philanthropic work. Maybe you're a silent philanthropist. So can you explain about your philanthropic work to?
Yeah, so we have a philanthropic organization called Social Venture Partners. It's called SVP. SVP was started in Seattle some years back.
Oh.
And this is there all over the world. In India, it was started also in Bangalore mostly. So this was driven quite a lot initially by Microsoft employees. And then it became, in India also, it was started by mostly by Microsoft people. And then it has become now, every city has got its chapter. So I am a partner in the Hyderabad chapter. The Hyderabad chapter. So what we do in SVP in general is that we help startups, we help NGOs to scale up. So we are not a funder. We don't give a lot of funds. We do give a little bit of funding, but more than funds, we actually give our thinking. We give our time. We use our networks to actually help them to connect with the right people. We help them to, you see, many of the NGOs are very passionate about their work. They are started by very passionate people. But they are not necessarily very good at scaling up and making into running it like a business. Although they are not meant for profit, but they should run it efficiently, like how a for-profit organization is run. So we help them in actually making them run these things efficiently, scale them up, and also connect them with the right people, use our networks. So to get the time of, and we have very, very highly qualified people as our partners. We call them partners. And very highly qualified people whose time is very valuable and their advice could be very valuable. So we take the help of these people to actually guide some of these NGOs. So that is the work we are doing. For example, each partner gets attached to an NGO. Like I'm attached to an NGO called Youth for Jobs in Hyderabad. Youth for Jobs is run by Meera Shenoy, lady. She actually trains people with disabilities from rural areas and trains them and places them with companies, corporates, and finds them jobs and places them. She also works with the corporates to tweak the jobs, because a job has to undergo slight changes so that the person with the disabilities can handle that job. So this kind of work. So I'm actually attached to them. So I work with them to make that into a successful one. So that like that. So we have about 30 partners in Hyderabad, and each one tries to help some of the NGOs like that.
What a satisfaction you must be getting working with these things. I have one question which I would like to reserve it at the end.
Okay.
Showstopper. Let me start. I mean, none other than Mr. Uni has raised his hand. Of course, he himself is a legend. But I would like to hear his voice and then see how we chat and then see.
Sure.
Mr. Uni, honored to have you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ram has spoke very well, I must say. He was working with me for a long time. So, hearty congratulations, Ram, for a wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Reviewed very, very neutrally. I have 2 points to make, very quick points. One is that a lot of government schemes are coming off late, with the national the impact. But don't you think it's a good idea, such yojanas as we come from the Prime Minister yojanas, are tested in a small area, like a pilot testing or test marketing, and then release nationally? I think we are too fast that the whole nation is one area. I think it would be better, like in a chemical field, we do a pilot plant study, then go to the commercial plant. So that's one thing I want to say. Yeah. Second point, sometimes we underscore the influence of the government extension worker. We have a lot of government extension workers in the country, but at the end, I don't think they're tuned to the modern technology. They are not understanding their duty for agricultural development, etc., etc. I think that they have to be harnessed and roped into the system that we function as one team rather than government is extension worker is one, private company is another. We have a limited number, but they have a large number actually of people. How do we rope in them into the developmental scheme of tomorrow?
Absolutely, absolutely correct, and that's a very fantastic point. We discussed this in the Paroda committee also. There is something called KVKs, which are present all over the country, and these KVKs, our recommendation was to make them as a nucleus around which extension messages are created for that particular area. The same message, and then whether it is a government extension worker or private extension worker, they're all trained in that. Otherwise, today what happens is that the farmer gets 5 different messages from 5 different people. So he gets confused. So we said that there must be a coordinated approach on that, and KVK must become the center of such knowledge dissemination. So including training of even government extension workers. So, but I think it is something on which they will have to still work, but I agree completely with you on this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah, Murthy, PVGK Murthy.
Yeah.
You had raised the hand earlier. Hi.
Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can. We can.
Very nice interaction.
Murthy, though I know you, probably Mr. Ram Kondena knows you for the benefit for the benefit of others. Can you introduce yourself?
For others, yeah, please say who you are. Yeah, I know you, but yeah.
Yeah, great. Good evening, everybody. I am PVGK Murthy from Ingrain Technologies, based at Hyderabad. We are operating throughout India. We are into agribusiness consulting. I just want to understand from Ram Kaundinya sir about the way forward for seed industry, in coming 5 years. What are all the major developments that are going to come in the next 5 years span?
I think I mentioned about the likely mega trends in agriculture. So I think the seed industry will have to take that into account and plan their activities. But in general, for the industry, I think more and more value addition will happen to the industry through better quality seed, because I think the need for better quality seed is increasing day by day. Whether it is a variety or a hybrid or GM or non-GM, whatever it is, I think the research investment must go up. So this is one thing which I keep saying, that our 3% research investment must become 10%. I think that is very important because without research investment, you can't bring better quality products. For example, the other day I was participating in a webinar with the Dutch government on protected cultivation of vegetables. Protected cultivation of vegetables in India is not scaling up because we don't have varieties which are suitable for protected cultivation. Because we are not investing in research to develop such varieties. We are still importing seed for protected cultivation from outside, from Europe. So every new method we want to follow, like protected cultivation, micro irrigation, even drip irrigation system needs specially architectured seed variety plant architecture, so that it gets the best. Mechanization needs a special plant architecture. I think the seed industry has to focus on some of these things and develop such varieties which will carry a lot of what we call the last mile connectivity for all these new technologies to actually deliver value to the farmer. So I think that is one area where I would request seed industry. Of course, the research investment I have already mentioned. The third point I want to mention is that the entire seed production system has to become much more modern and technology driven, mechanized, so that, for example, how long we will be able to produce hybrid cotton in the country? If the labor cost keeps going up like this, how will you produce? So that means you need some kind of technologies which will help you to produce hybrid seeds efficiently and at lower cost. Seed production, in my opinion, will become a constraint at some stage for the growth of the seed industry. So there must be enough investment made in developing new production methods and making them actually more and more efficient. So these are a few things I would like to mention, but of course, use of digital technology. You see the entire seed communication system and farmer communication and that entire thing, one has to use more and more digital technologies. So I think these are a few things I would like to suggest, but more and more investments have to come. You see, we have to have, I always say this, that there's no need to have 500 seed companies. If you have good quality 100 seed companies, they will do a better job. But that doesn't mean that I want less companies. I'm only saying that even 500 companies must become strong with research, with production technologies, with ethical standards, with the legal standards, compliances. You know, we have 15% of cotton area today occupied by unauthorized GM seed, which is a shame actually. And it is there because we still don't follow the law and we don't follow ethics in business. I think these are some of the areas which still need the attention of the seed industry.
Great, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Murthy. Thank you so much for joining. Sir, I have two questions from Tarak, so I'll read out for you.
Yeah.
If you can answer. The first question is, he says, what is the future for biological seed treatments?
Biological seed treatment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's his question. What is the future?
It's a great future. Firstly, so we have two components of seed treatment market today. One, what is used by companies. Companies do the seed treatment in the factory and then they send it. Second is what is called on-farm seed treatment. On-farm seed treatment for saved seed, farm saved seed currently is still not very good. I think that is something which has to improve. Even for factory-based seed treatment, we use very old chemicals. We still don't have very modern chemicals. We don't still have systems of seed enhancement technologies. What are called seed enhancement technologies, which are used in other countries, where you create uniform shape and size seeds in a crop, and then you use them for mechanical planting and things like that. So we still don't have that because we don't have the market for it, and it has to happen still. I think seed treatment has a huge opportunity. Biological seed treatment has particularly got a huge opportunity. We have to develop suitable products. I think that is where the thing is, that what is suitable for India, our crops and our tropical climate, we must have those biological products. Unfortunately, biological products come with a baggage in India, and that baggage must go. That baggage will go only when you invest in research, you come with high quality products, and you are not cheating the farmer, but you are actually enhancing farmers, the quality of the product that is being delivered to the farmer. I think these are some things which have to still happen. But to answer the question, I would say that the future for biological seed treatments is very high. Just like in general for seed treatments, the future is very high. And it is for biologicals to come with good products and take over that market.
There's another question from Tarak again. He says, he's asked, what is the future of hydroponics and new vertical farming models in urban and peri-urban farming?
Like I said before, everything has a place, right? So hydroponics, vertical farming, aeroponics, all of them have their own place. Now, can one of them become a silver bullet? I don't think so. But I think they have their own space. Hydroponics will play an important role. Like I said, the bottom of the pyramid will still need the mass production, low cost stuff. But those who are at the very high end of the pyramid will buy such things. Technologies have to still develop. These are all in very early stages still. Can these technologies produce high quality products at low cost and at that scale is a big question. How long it will take is a question. I think they may be able to do it, but how long it will take is another question. A lot of research has to go into these things. So I think we should definitely adopt these technologies. But there is still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you, sir, on his behalf. I'll request Mr. Sadanand to unmute and speak. Mr. Sadananda, are you there?
Yeah, I can see him. And I can see his name. Not.
Yeah, no, he's there, but I think he's unmute, please.
You have to unmute, Sada.
Yeah, okay. By the time I request Mr. Shankar Bale. Mr. Shankar Bale, are you there? Yes. Yes, sir, go ahead. Unmute yourself, please.
Yes, sir. Are you hearing, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we can hear.
My name is Shankar Bale. I am representing Astha Biocare Private Limited, Jalna. This is engaged in seed business. I have a little question, one question, sir, with due respect. See, as you know, seed is the only single input in all the industrial sector which requires a planning of producing the quantities well ahead in time.
Yeah.
With due respect, we want to get your expert advice that in the existing rapid growth of phase, how we can focus on seed industry for faster growth, because this industry is entirely uncertain due to climatic and environmental changes every time.
Yeah, I think we have to find answers to that uncertainties, because we always lived with uncertainties. You know, even in the last 30 years when the seed industry has grown, we did manage to manage those uncertainties. Yeah. I think we will keep falling and getting up because we'll keep making mistakes and we'll keep finding the answers. I think it has to be done, but we have to bring, that's what I was saying, that we have to focus more on making our production systems more predictable and sustainable. How can we do that? How can we actually move production into that level of certainty? It will never become 100% certain, but I think we need to really work on that. But otherwise, you know, our usual problems are there, that we have to predict the demand next year, and then we have to produce now. If we have to produce now, we have to produce parent seed in the previous year. So you need 2 years of projection to produce parent seed. I think we can't get away from that. That is something which the whole world lives with. But can we bring more? You see, if you have something like this regulated farming, which happened in Telangana this year, if the government comes with more plans on some kind of a guideline on acreages for crops, which I think, depending upon how this succeeds, we will know the success of this in the next 2-3 months' time. This may then get actually implemented even in other states. So there will be some level of certainty which will come through that kind of a planning. We also said that agriculture has to become demand driven. So there will be some systems which will come into play in terms of projecting demand for different crops and food items, which will again give some direction towards planning for crop acreages. But you will never have perfect solutions. I think we'll have to live with certain level of uncertainty, but we'll have to build some of these systems which will mitigate the risk.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shankar. Mr. Pradeep Dovale.
All my friends are coming. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Thanks to you.
Hi, Ram. Hi, Raj.
I
posted my question on Q&A actually.
For the benefit of audience, can you introduce yourself, Pradeep?
Thanks. Yeah. Pradeep Dovale, I retired as Executive Director FMCG in ITC Limited. Prior to that, I had a long stint in paper business of ITC in Hyderabad. And Ram is a good friend. Should I reveal? We are single malt.
Yeah, we are single malt friends.
Yeah. So basically, my question was related to somebody else asked about hydroponics, and also it's related to startup ecosystem. Post retirement, I have become active in startup ecosystem, and some other companies I mentor happen to be in agri sector. So there is so much talk about precision agriculture and smart agriculture and satellite imagery and so on and so forth. My question really is, how long it's going to take to make a meaningful impact to the Indian farmer by application of all these technologies. All these thousands of startups which are coming up, people keep saying that the next unicorn in India is going to come from agri-tech sector. It was e-commerce, it was fintech, and then people are talking about edutech and agri-tech. But edutech seems to have overtaken agri-tech. So it's all urban consumer driven, it appears,
Yeah,
correct. So that's my question really, to make a meaningful impact on Indian agriculture.
So there are 2-3 points, Pradeep. One is that most of the people who develop these technologies are techies, and they need actually some domain expertise to guide them on the proper impact they can make with these technologies. So there is right now a bandwagon. So many people are jumping onto that bandwagon, but as it happens, there will be some kind of, some will fall off, and then eventually good quality one will survive. This is point number one. Point number two is that if you throw so many technologies and so many agri-techs at the farmer space, he won't be able to make out anything out of that. So one of the thoughts which we are working on currently in ThinkAg, as well as in my discussions with, we had a discussion with Telangana government on various startups. There also this point came that you need a master platform on which these things will get embedded, so that when a farmer enters that platform from one end, he is able to use different startups arranged in sequential order till the end. So that he doesn't have to go here and there, and then there is also certain level of validation which has happened by the time this startup, agri-tech startup is put onto that platform. I think that is an activity that is being done currently to develop such a platform. I think it is purely a technological phenomenon, but there will be many questions related to that, whether it should be free for all, whether there should be quality control, whether there should be any charge for it, or is it open source platform? How will the farmer get protected? So there are many questions related to that which are under discussion. And I will send you some material on that. You can also read that. So that is another one that will happen. The third point I want to mention is that it will never become 100% digital. I think the way our agriculture is organized, it will eventually settle down to be a phygital kind of a structure where there is some physical infrastructure which is backed by a digital backbone. I think this is what will happen eventually. Now, what is that level of infrastructure and what is the level of digital backbone is something which is not yet, that balance is still not known. I think this is something which is still taking place on a bit of a trial and error basis. But since you asked about the timelines, I will be very happy if these things settle down into a stable system by the end of this decade.
Thanks, Ram.
Yeah, Pradeep, just to share, and I have your email ID, so we'll share with you what Mr. Ram Kaundinya was my advisor. We had a Digital Ag India conference, so most of these things are deliberated. I'll surely share a
thank you.
Along with we just released a video also on this. So now I'll take one last question from Mr. Lakshman Reddy. Lakshman Reddy, you can unmute.
Lakshman is 1 year senior to me in Bapatla, and also I am Ahmedabad. So.
Oh, I don't know if he's there. Can you unmute? Though he's seen as an attendee right now.
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. There was a problem in getting into this meeting. I think the link wise, it's an embedded link that is given. If the link is given explicit, I would have joined easily. There was some problem. I lost about an hour. So I joined the meeting only at 5 o'clock.
I'm so sorry for that.
But doesn't matter. No, it's not your fault. Probably my technology is so low that I could not find a way. And finally, I could make it. Okay, coming back, I really don't know whether I have a major question because...
I have a question for you. Please introduce yourself.
Okay. My only introduction is I'm a friend of Ram Kaundinya.
No. It is not like that. Lakshman Reddy is highly experienced in agriculture and also electronics fields. So he is also IIM Ahmedabad alumnus. Yeah. So tell me.
Okay, coming back, say I don't have a question because I have not heard Ram or you speaking for the first 1 hour, but I would like to make a couple of observations,
Sure.
which actually hurt me very badly. One is the extension in this country has become extinct. Whatever is happening on the top is not reaching the farmer, which was the case in late 60s and early 70s when we had green revolution. The lot of technology. The technology was not just the seed. There's an integrated farming practices have been transferred from lab to land from around 1968 to about 75 or so. That extension department has become extinct. If probably if this is covered already, please you don't have to answer again. This is one of my observations. Unless that is done, the farmer will not be reached. The second thing that makes me feel very bad is the number of suicides that happened in the last 25 years in agri sector, especially the farmers. Within them, again, the commercial crop farmers, not the paddy or wheat farmers, mostly the commercial crops farmers, is something which hurts every Indian. It doesn't happen in any other industry so much as here. So then the third point what I have is, these are not questions, these are some of my observations. The third point is, the respect for the farmer is not there today, which was there 30, 40 years back. Today somebody says, I am working in a corporate company drawing about 15,000 rupees salaries, is respected more than a guy in the village having about 10 acres and struggling to meet both ends meet. The respect is not there. And people are not coming forward to give their daughters to the sons of a farmer who is settling on the farm. These are social issues, but I don't think Ram can do or Mr. Raj Agarwal can do much about it. But these are some of the observations. The third observation that I have is, I don't have statistics on the tenancy kind of a proportion. We have 5 acres. My wife has about 5-6 acres in her village, but we never cultivated it. So is the case with a lot of thousands and lakhs of farmers. The children of the farmers are going abroad, either for IT or into cities. There is a social fabric change that is happening in the village. That needs to be captured, I suppose. These are some of the observations. I could be wrong because I have been away from agri sector for a long time. But one suggestion I have to Ram and other agri people who are there, I heard some seed industry people and other people. One small suggestion is, I request all of you people to stay in a village, sleep over in a village, at least one day in a year. Live among the farmers on the cart there, talk to them morning to evening, have dinner with them. One day out of 365 days. This is my request to all of you. And I do that myself. I do spend a time to go and sit with the farmer, talk to them. I used to ask some very interesting questions. I asked some farmers in Krishna district, things are so bad that every farmer says, look, I am losing money. I said, if you are losing money, why are you not committing suicide? No, because my land value has gone up so much, I don't have to commit suicide. So the values of lands have gone up, and that is the comfort that they had. But I love to be with the villagers at least for a day or two in a year. So these are some observations. There are no questions because I have not heard the beginning part of it.
And I think these are all important points. There is no doubt. Extension has collapsed, so we have to build that extension. That's what I was mentioning earlier, that there is a proposal we made that we should use KVKs as centers of extension and rebuild the whole extension network. The second point is that the suicides, I have a different take on suicides, and I will send you some statistics on that. It is the farmer suicide rate is much less than the national suicide rate. So
okay,
it is not that any suicide is encouraged or is good, but all suicides are bad. But I don't think it is an alarming thing. So I will also send you some statistics on that. In fact, we are analyzing the latest report of National Crime Report Bureau, which came out only last week. So we will give you some statistics on that.
Okay.
The third point that we should go to the village and live there, I think it's a very good idea. I will take your help and then plan it out.
Yeah, we will go together.
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Lakshman Reddy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Ras.
Yeah. Now, I think, sir, I asked for 60 minutes from you. I think it's now getting 2 hours, 120
No,
minutes.
that's okay.
And thank you that you didn't have any other engagement for next at least 1 hour after 5. So I have one last question. I would say being a legend. Two questions rather. One is, what is the secret of your leadership style that has made you what you are? This is my first question.
Okay, so I think there are a few things which I practiced and they have given me success. So I suppose that is a formula which worked for me. You know, every person is a different package. So every person has to find out his or her own package, what works for him or herself. But if I have to list out a few things, of course, like I mentioned earlier, passion for the work and hard work, integrity, discipline, these are all things which I picked up from childhood, from different people, parents and brothers, and then my mentors and everybody. So that actually has given me a lot of the base on which I have worked. But if I have to list 2 or 3 things which actually helped me on the job, number one is compassion and human touch. So this is something on which I have dealt with my teams. And I think it has helped me and them both, because many people who worked with me have become quite big in their own way, and they have gone and got into very good jobs, and they have done very well. And the teams always produced results. So I think that human touch is something which I used even when I had to take some tough decisions. When I was managing director of Cyanamide, I had to close my factory and sell it off to our local partner with some 350 workers who have been working with the company for decades. So similarly, when I was in Advanta, we had to run a restructuring program in Australia, where for 50 years, that company never had any restructuring program. So it was a shock for them. So on such occasions, when I have to do certain things which are not pleasant to do, I do them with the human face and human touch, and I try to help the people in such situations as much as possible. So compassion and human touch and having a genuine feeling for people. See, many managers show an artificial feeling for people, and you can make it out very quickly. The guy who is receiving that communication can make out very easily. May not be the first time, but second time he will definitely make out. So I think to have a genuine liking for people comes out of looking at the positive side of every person, looking at the strengths of a person and having positive attitude about that. So that is something which I followed throughout. And so that is something which I think has helped me. Second thing is that relationship management with people, peers and others in the organization and with people outside the organization, whether it is government or various people. I think these, I have always managed these relationships in a non-threatening way. While being firm, you can still do them in a non-threatening way, because I think that's where some people lose their relationships, because they do it in a very threatening manner. So that actually it is counterproductive. So I try to do them in a very non-threatening way. Result orientation is always there. I think without that, I couldn't have survived in the industry for a long time. But I should say that my strengths there are the clarity of thought is something which I also know it, and I feel very proud about that. So the clarity of thought I plan things very well. I mean, it is not like last minute things. I do plan things quite well. And many people do tell me, and they do accept that I'm a bit of a cool-headed fellow, in the sense that I don't lose my temper, and I try to manage without losing my temper. Somebody asked me, how do you manage to remain cool? I said that, say, I can't shout at my boss because then I will lose my job. I can't shout at my peers because then I will be isolated in the office. And if I shout at my team members, then anyway, they will not produce results because I can't do anything by myself. It's only the team which has produced results. I don't shout at anybody because that is counterproductive actually. So I try to manage without losing my cool. And it is not easy, I can tell you that. It is not easy because you face so many tough situations on the job and a lot of stress on the job. I did take a lot of stress, but I worked very hard to maintain that cool attitude towards that. But I spend a lot of time on guiding people, helping them, creating strategies in advance, creating plans in advance, which avoid last minute stress. So those are a few things I think which helped me.
Awesome. Now we have heard you. Awesome. I really enjoyed your biography, I would say. And I'm honored that I'm the first person to talk to you. You mentioned that you very rarely spoke about yourself outside.
Yeah.
And
First time actually I'm speaking about myself actually.
So we are honored, sir. I'm really personally honored. Now, can you guide for the future for people, the youth, like especially agriculture as a subject, or some of the leaders who would like to, like you did mention about your leadership qualities and the reason why you were so successful. What is your message before we wind up?
I think the first thing people must know is that we are doing a very important work. I think this must be there in people's minds that our work is very important for the country and it is very important for the farmers because we are helping the farmers. Whatever you are doing, whether you are in fertilizer business or pesticide business or seed business or tractors or whatever you are doing, our objective should be farmers' welfare. This is something, I think the days are gone when you just sell and run. That type of selling is no longer valid. We have to work for the benefit of the farmer. We have to make sure that he makes money at the end of the day. So how to do that? Can you provide some integrated solutions to him is something on which I think we should work. So we should consider that the work we are doing is very important. Secondly, we should work for the welfare of the farmer in whatever industry we are working. So don't give him things which you know that are not in his benefit. In his benefit means not only his monetary benefit, but also in terms of his soils, in terms of his crop, in terms of his environment. I think we have to be more and more aware of the environmental impact of the products we sell. And you should never feel ashamed that you sold a particular product to the farmers. So I think you must always feel good about the products and the solutions you have given to the farmer, because you know that they were in the farmer's interest, they were in the national interest, and they were in the interest of the society. So I think those are important considerations you must have in your work. You must have, for your success, I think you have to look at where the world is going. I think that is also very important consideration you must have and adapt yourself to that. What is happening to the world around you, to the society around you, and adapt yourself and adjust your work according to that. Like, the whole employment scene is undergoing a huge change. In fact, today only I have written an article on LinkedIn on this particular thing. So the whole employment scenario is undergoing a huge change. So you know that the future will not be the future of lifelong employments, and then those days are gone. The gig economy and the gig jobs are going to overtake. So how do you manage all those situations? You have to think through all that. So the society is undergoing a huge change. It will not be the same society in 10 years time. So how do you actually adapt yourself to that? So like the change in cities will be, so the cities move at a particular speed, but the villages will move at a slightly lesser speed. So there will be always that differential in terms of the speed, which will create some stress and tensions. So, but we have to actually be aware of what is going to happen in the future. And finally, like I mentioned, you must have result orientation. I think this is an area where we tend to become either too result oriented and ignore the softer skills of the work, or we become so soft that we ignore the results. So these two are two extremes. So I think the key lies in managing a balance between the two. You may win a war, but if you have lost all the soldiers in that win, then it is of no use. So you have to win wars, but at the same time, you should not kill people on the way. You should not kill the environment on the way. You should not kill ultimately the farmer on the way. The farmer is your biggest asset. We must always protect him. So those are a few things I would like to tell people who are going to pursue careers in agriculture. I think it is going to be a good future for people in agriculture. The world is recognizing that agriculture is very important. I think COVID has brought agriculture and food back onto the center stage, which is a good thing. I think youngsters who are pursuing this career now should consider this to be a good path for them to take and to produce results which are going to be good for the world. Okay, so those are a few things I thought I can mention.
Wonderful. So passionate, every word of yours that has come from you, Dil Se. I'm honored. Thank you, my audience. They've been so supportive as usual. For all our updates, you can visit our Facebook page or LinkedIn page, Ray Consulting. And all our Ray Talks are uploaded on YouTube/Ray Consulting. Sir, thank you so much for taking out so much time, and I'm sure it's immensely benefited all of us, the entire fraternity in agriculture in general. And once people watch you on YouTube, they would further, I'm sure they will take every point of yours to see how much we can practice from that. So thank you for joining. Audience, thank you so much. Good night and take care. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Raj. Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone who has attended. Thank you very much.